In this demonstration, I'll be using the Azure Portal to create a new Azure storage account. As the name implies, an Azure storage account is a cloud storage location. But when you define a new storage account, there are a number of detailed settings to consider, depending on things like the type of performance you want, or the type of durability, or how many replicas of data you might need replicated throughout the Azure infrastructure. Now here in the Azure Portal, I'm at the home page where I could click Storage Accounts, which takes me to the Storage Accounts view. Now, I don't have any storage accounts listed right now, but I could add one by clicking the Add button. Now, instead of doing that, what we could also do is click the Create a Resource link over in the upper left. And from there, it opens up a new blade where we could search for what we want to create. So if I look for storage account, we could search for it that way, or we could simply browse what's presented to us on the screen. So I could simply go down under the storage category on the left, and then on the right, within that, choose Storage Account, which I will do. The first thing we have to think about is the subscription to which this storage account will be tied. I only have one subscription, so that's an easy choice. Then I have to associate this with a resource group. I could either create a new one or choose from an existing one in the drop-down list, which I will do. I'll choose RG1. Further down below, I have to give a name to the storage account. Notice uppercase letters will not be allowed. Lowercase are fine, but if I start using uppercase letters, it gives me a little red error message here about the fact that the name can only contain lowercase letters and numbers. And notice if I back out of the capital letters here, that if I just put in a name that's already in use that isn't globally unique, it will tell me. So I'm going to go ahead and call this East Storage Account. Now if I put in 1, it'll determine whether or not that's a unique name. And in this case it is, because we've got the green check mark, we don't have the red error text. And of course, we always need to make sure we adhere to organizational naming standards as it applies to the creation of Azure resources. For the location, I'm going to specify Canada East, that's my region. The performance is either standard or premium. In other words, with standard, do we want to use older hard disk technology like magnetic hard disks that spin, or the newer solid state storage which provides better performance? Of course, it also means an increased cost. Now, depending on what we're planning on doing with the stuff that we put in this storage account really determines the next couple of selections. So if we're not going to have frequent access to what we're going to store in the cloud, we might want to just stick with standard performance. But if we're going to have frequent access and we want it to be speedy, maybe we should look at using premium. Down below, I've also got to specify the account kind, whether it's storage v2, general purpose storage, or general purpose version 1 storage, or blob storage. Now with general purpose version 2 type of storage, we have an access tier, cool or hot. Similar to standard and premium, for frequently accessed data and the speediest access, we should be choosing the hot access tier. If this is more of an archive type of usage scenario, we would look at using a cool access tier. Now, if I were to switch this to storage general purpose v1, notice that we lose the option of selecting the storage tier. And if I were to choose blob storage, binary large object, we then get a couple of additional options for replication. So the first option is locally redundant storage, or LRS. Now this means that we've got some replication that will occur within the Azure environment, but at a very small level, not, for example, across regions. Whereas geo-redundant storage, if we were to select that, does provide replication across Azure regions geographically. And the benefit of doing this is that if there's some kind of a large-scale disaster or outage within an entire geographical region, well, your data has already been replicated elsewhere and you can access it that way. Then we've got another variation called read-ahead geo-redundant storage, RAGRS. So essentially, this is similar to replicating across Azure regions, the difference being that we would have read access only to a replica. So depending on what your storage requirements are, will determine what you select here. It's important to realize that if we were to choose storage v2, general purpose v2, that we can change it later on if we want to, for example, blob storage, if we're going to be working with storage, let's say, of virtual machine hard disks. So we can always change our mind later. So generally speaking, the general purpose V2 account kind is what you'll see used more often than not in Azure. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Here we have a couple of options, such as whether we want to enable secure transfer. This would mean only allowing connections over HTTPS or newer versions of SMB, the Server Message Block Protocol, as opposed to older, less secure standards. So I'm going to leave that on enabled. Then we can determine what we want to allow access from in terms of virtual networks. And currently it says all networks. If I were to click selected network, then from the drop-down list I could choose an existing Azure virtual network that I previously have defined. However, I'm going to leave it on all networks for now. We're going to talk about data lake storage later on, so I'm going to leave that disabled as a default setting, and then I'll click Next. So we then get to decide whether we want to assign a tag to this storage account. And remember, tagging is just metadata. It's extra information that you might use here so you can search or sort or assign costs to a department or a project. And from the name drop-down list, if I've already defined a tag before, which I have, it'll show up. I've already used a tag called project, so I'm going to go ahead and specify that. Then I can give it a value, and I can also see any existing values I might have used for tagging, in this case project A. I'm going to go with it. I could add a multitude of tags, but I'm just going to leave it that way for now. Technically, I don't have to add tags at all. Then I'll click Next to review my settings. Now notice it says the validation has passed based on my selection. We have a little summary here of what's going to be created. I also have the option to download a template for automation. That is an ARM template that uses JSON file syntax. And why would I do that? Well, I might download it if I want to be able to deploy a storage account with all these settings from the template in the future, maybe even using the Azure CLI or PowerShell, which is way quicker than doing it here and clicking on all these things in the screen. So it allows for repetition, automation, that type of thing. However, I'm okay with this. I'm going to click on the Create button to create the storage account. And it's taken us into an overview screen for the deployment of our new storage account. We can see some information related to it down below, but at the same time I could simply go over to All Resources on the left. And after I refresh it, we'll see that we do have our new storage account listed. And like always, we can see the resource group it was deployed into, the region or location. And in this case, if you've added the tags column, you'll see that here too. The tags column is not normally here by default unless you go to Edit Columns, select it on the left, and then click the arrow to move it on the right, which I've already done. So therefore, I can see some tag information. If I were to click on that storage account, it opens up the Properties blade for it, and I could go back and take a look at the tags and make changes to it, or I could go through and look at the settings specific, in this case, to a storage account, such as geo-replication options if I want to enable that type of item. Also, I can see if I want to configure blog service settings and so on. So we have a number of properties available then after we've configured an Azure storage account. But there you have it. That's how you can initially create the storage account here in the Azure portal.